Fair trade contributes to sustainable development. So basically the playing field is not equal, we know that. And we need sustainable, long-lasting development. And the way that we can get that is by offering better trading conditions to and securing the rights of marginalized producers. I want to thank Catherine for the accurate, I am a nice person, intro, thanking Nancy too, and Joy and Elise and everybody who made my visit to Chicago possible. It's a real honor to be in this fair trade town. I've had the privilege of watching the evolution of Chicago Fair Trade and how you guys have gotten that declaration and how you create events like this, including people like Pushpika, who we're going to hear from, one of the pioneers of fair trade handcrafts, and Maureen from Mata Traders, who is an up-and-coming entrepreneur and great visionary about fair trade. So you bring great people together. You guys are obviously committed to the values of fair trade, and I think what my job is tonight is to talk a little bit about what those values are, how they relate to fair trade certification for clothing, and what are some challenges and possibilities. And then we'll hear from those businesses, Mata Traders and Marketplace India, and see if we can come to any understanding about a way forward as we try to continue the work that we heard about. I appreciated Lisa's introduction and the tour of Whole House. That was a real privilege to be introduced directly to that legacy, and we're clearly standing on the shoulders of some incredible reformers, and hopefully fair traders like you and me can take our place and keep that work going, because unfortunately in this century too, just as in 2 centuries past, there is a lot of work that needs to be done about achieving justice in the workplace. Before I give you the overview about fair trade, I need to tell you a little bit about who I'm representing. So I've been involved in economic justice for 20 years, but I work for Catholic Relief Services, and we've been serving people in need for more than 65 years. We are the official international humanitarian organization of the U.S. Catholic community, and we have a two-pronged mission. What we're trying to do is to promote human development by responding to major emergencies, earthquakes in Haiti, tsunami in the Pacific, but also long-term to try to build peaceful and just societies by addressing poverty and concerns of health. And we also serve U.S. Catholics here, people who are trying to live their faith in solidarity with their brothers and sisters overseas. We have an office here in Chicago. We have a great staff all across the United States. One of them is here tonight, Jesus Huerta, who I think is a former member of Chicago Fair Trade, so glad to see him come in all the way from Portland for this event. Not really. So one of the ways that we help U.S. Catholics and other people of goodwill live their faith is by offering them fair trade options. We have a fair trade crafts program with a Midwestern group you might have heard of named SERVE, which is one of the founding members of the fair trade movement, based in Madison, Wisconsin. We have a coffee program with coffee companies like Peace Coffee in Minneapolis, and Higher Grounds Trading in Traverse City, and Just Coffee in Madison. So we try to identify fair trade coffee companies, crafts company, chocolate. We also have a chocolate program. And we try to get those businesses to raise their visibility so Catholics can then, as I was saying, just as we have rights as consumers, we have responsibility to buy ethically. But the number one question that I get, and people say, yeah, I know which coffee to sip, and maybe Whole House can talk a little bit more about that with the soup tomorrow, but I know which chocolate to nibble on, I know which wine to drink, but what clothes do I wear? What are fair trade clothing options in this world, in today's world? We know, unfortunately, about the long history of sweatshops, but here, what do we do? And so that's one of the reasons that CRS has been trying to work with an organization called Fair Trade USA. Fair Trade USA is one of the certifiers of fair trade products here in the United States, and they have had some success with things like coffee and chocolate and wine and fruit. And so the idea was, just like Florence Kelly said with the white label, in last century, maybe if we could help consumers identify which clothing matches their values, then they would be more likely to buy that clothing, reward companies that are doing the right thing, and by extension transfer the benefits of that commerce to factory workers, to cotton farmers who are growing the cotton. I'm sorry, the gentleman keeps moving the camera, and I think somebody has questions. So, by the way, if you have questions, just stop me. And get the hook, Nancy, if you need to. If I talk too long, I'm going to try to keep it within my 25 minutes, but I forgot to start my watch. So everything I've set up to now doesn't count. So the Fair Trade Certification pilot, that tells us it's an experiment. It's temporary. We're not sure how it's going to work out. But it is already controversial. It's controversial for a few reasons. One is that the organization that is leading it up, Fair Trade USA, has been attracting a lot of concern and commendation in the fair trade movement. At the question and answer time, we can get to that if you want to. Another reason is that the standards for the pilot are also coming into question. What does it mean for a factory worker to work in a decent working condition? What is a minimum wage that meets basic needs and then a little bit extra for one's family? Or should it even be minimum wage, or should it be a living wage? And then a third big controversy, which I'm delighted that Mata and Marketplace will talk to us about perhaps, is how do artisans who are also making clothing but not in a factory setting, how do they relate to certification? So those are some of the reasons why there's all a buzz. We didn't answer any of those questions in the pilot yet. The trip that I'm going to tell you about in India also created more questions than there are answers. But it is a very dynamic and vibrant, and with people like you involved and asking good questions, I think we can create a way forward. We have to start with some of the basics. I know some of you raised your hands. This is your first time, so let's just make sure we're all on the same page about fair trade. Is anybody brave enough to stand up and say what they think fair trade means? No. Okay, fine. That's all right. So in my book, I talk about that that fair trade means many things to many different people. Some people think it's a marketing ploy. You want fair trade, we'll give you fair trade. You want green, we'll give you green. You want recycled, we'll give you recycled. We'll give you what you want. Some people think it is a social movement, much like the reformers of the Hull House. They think that fair trade needs to change the terms of trade and needs to be a factor in a systemic shift in how we do business in the world. Some people think that fair trade is certification. It's meeting a certain checklist. There is one official definition, and I'm going to give it to you right now. If you got on your agenda, you got some websites. There's lots of great places that you can find information, so don't worry about if it doesn't commit to memory. But fair trade is a partnership based on dialogue, transparency, and respect that seeks to restore greater equity in trade. So first of all, it's a partnership. It's businesses and producers. It's consumers and businesses. And it has some core values. Dialogue between the producers and the businesses, between the businesses and the consumers. Transparency, knowing and being accountable for what your business practices are, both as producers and as businesses. Being transparent to your customers so that they know what your company is about, where the products came from, and respect. And that is a sense of where we're trying to achieve that greater equity, that trading traditionally does not favor the marginalized and disadvantaged. It contributes, fair trade contributes to sustainable development. So basically the playing field is not equal, we know that. And we need sustainable, long-lasting development. And the way that we can get that is by offering better trading conditions to and securing the rights of marginalized producers. So there again, it's about the producers. It's about trying to help to use trade in the service of people who are struggling in poverty for a variety of reasons. It's both producers and workers. And then fair trade organizations, which are backed by consumers like you and me, are engaged in fair trade by building awareness, like Chicago Fair Trade does, and in campaigning for changes in the rules and practices of fair trade. Rules and changes of conventional trade. That's what fair trade is, technically. That's the paragraph that standardizes it. And yet, it doesn't say anything about a minimum price. It doesn't say anything about how many hours you're allowed to work. It doesn't say anything about what the terms of credit should be, or what the environmental practices should be, or how old you have to be. All of those things have to be worked out. And so there are organizations like Fair Trade USA that are trying to work that out. There are also organizations like the Fair Trade Federation who have established principles. The World Fair Trade Organization also has established guiding principles for what how to take that definition and how to put it into practice. Certification is just one attempt. It is not the only attempt, and it is, as I've already said, ripe with lots of problems. One of the problems is the standard around the wages. Does anybody know what your minimum wage is for Illinois? Hourly wage? $8.25. Good job. In Maryland, where I come from, it's $7.25. So the federal hourly wage, minimum wage, is $7.25. States can add to it. Illinois has added to it. That's great. But Maryland hasn't. Not so great for me. And then, of course, some analysts and anybody really who has a calculator can tell you that the minimum wage is really not enough to live. And so there are calculations of what a living wage would be, what would be necessary to catch up with the cost of living. Pennsylvania State University has a living wage calculator for the United States. I encourage you to look it up if you kind of want to figure out different regional differences. They have decided that here in Chicago, you guys need to make $9.39 for a living wage per hour. But me in Maryland, I need to make $12.34 where I live. So already I'm disadvantaged because the minimum doesn't really match the cost of living, and you guys have a slight advantage, but you're still at least $1 behind. And that's based on things like the cost of food, the cost of transportation, the cost of housing. That just gives a snapshot here in our country with regional differences on how complicated it is to say what is enough for a decent standard of living to get your basic needs met and then some. I don't share that to trivialize what's happening in the majority of the world. I just want to help us kind of relate to it in our own sense. But we know that millions of people live on $1 a day or $2 a day. And so how much they receive an hour really can be what keeps them in and out of poverty. And so there is quite a lot that's at stake for these folks. And some of them are in rural areas. They don't even have an option of working in factories. But if they're going to be working in factories, then we hope to build on the legacy of the white label and to build on the legacy of unionization and make sure that those factories in today's world are not sweatshops. And I know that there's been a lot of recent attention in the technology sector around Apple and Foxconn and what are the conditions for the laptops and iPhones that we use. So these are definitely current issues, but they're not just technology. Technology is what's getting the heat right now, but textiles and apparel are definitely at the forefront of our efforts to move beyond sweatshops. So there's a big problem. There are people trying to get their arms around it. There's another model that I should just mention very quickly because this might come up in the question and answers, and that is a model on college campuses. Is anybody a college student who's heard about the Alta Gracia model? Okay, so there is an experiment in the Dominican Republic. This is a great overview written by a Georgetown professor talking about this one factory that is in partnership with an apparel company called Knights Apparel. And they're also in partnership with a union rights organization called Workers' Rights Consortium. And they have committed to providing a living wage for the factory workers in the place called Alta Gracia. And they have designated a specific line of clothing. It's apparel for college and university licensing. So, you know, when you wear your DePaul University or Chicago or whatever school you go to. And it's that brand of clothing, and they've committed to a living wage. That's a great experiment. But it's one country, it's one factory, it's one company. We need to have other models and experiments, and that's what fair trade certification is trying to be all about. So let me tell you a little bit about the certification pilot, and then our trip to India. And pretty soon you're going to see a picture of a bunch of lovely people who traveled to India. What Fairtrade USA has tried to do, and it started in 2006, so this has been a long-term project. So what Fairtrade USA has done is created a multi-stakeholder group, which is basically a fancy way of saying they're trying to get together different interested parties to try to create the standards for what working conditions should be in a factory. They have certified factories in Liberia, Costa Rica, and India. So some of us traveled to India to have kind of an exploratory tour of how things were working out for the factory. It was not an inspection. It certainly was not a surprise. It wasn't an audit. It was a learning opportunity. We were there to look and listen and learn from the people who were running the factory and working in the factory. On the delegation, I was there, obviously. Fairtrade USA was obviously there. And then either through their own payment, so I want to make sure that this is clear too, because somebody brought this up to me earlier. They thought that Fairtrade USA funded all of this. Actually, Fairtrade USA did not fund all of this. We had a representative from Michigan State University or the University of Michigan. Oh man, Damani's going to be really mad at me if I confuse those two. But he's from Michigan, and he's an anthropologist, and he's a really smart guy. And he was there. Green America, who I think you guys host Greenfest here in Chicago, was represented. Presbyterian Church USA was represented. The Workers' Rights Consortium sent a couple of local reps, as did the Presbyterian Church. And then, of course, we had members of the factory owners, and we had representatives from cotton farmers. We attended, we went kind of in a triangle. We were down in middle central India where cotton was grown in Hyderabad. We went to Calcutta to visit a factory, and then we went south of Mumbai to another factory. So we saw two factories and one cotton farm. And our basic mission was, again, to look and to listen and to learn, and hopefully it will generate some questions for us too. These are organic farmers from a group called Chetna. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the organic nature of the certification, but all of the cotton has to be certified fair trade in a fair trade certified product. So this scarf is a fair trade certified product. The cotton was fair trade certified, as well as the factory setting. And that's going to be important to remember because of the complexity of the apparel chain. But in any case, we did get to speak to some farmers. Those of you who know anything about coffee or chocolate, you've probably gone through the steps of the coffee chain or how your chocolate bar got made. And it's very nice and it's very instructive, and I use it all the time. I'm not making fun of it. But clothing is so much more complex. And I think that we as fair traders have sometimes done a disservice because we've tried to make things simple for people and say, well, this is the way a coffee bean goes from the tree to your cup, and you can feel good about it. And it's very, very complex in apparel. Cotton may come from one country, it might be spun in another country, and then it might be cut and made and trimmed into an actual product in another country. So this is just a picture of showing cotton going off to market. This is a picture of textile being made, cloth being made, so the cotton gets spun and milled and ginned. That's not part of this pilot either. Thread being made, and these are massive machines costing tens of thousands of dollars to make this thread, also not part of the pilot. So one of the limitations of the pilot is that the supply chain is so complex, we could only take chunks of it out. And that has caused some consternation. But what is being certified is the factory conditions. So this is the second floor of a factory in Sangli, India. I'll call it Esteem because that's the name of the business. Several hundred workers there. And we also went to Calcutta and a factory called Raj Lakshmi, which had about 400 or 500 workers. So we're talking about workers and factory settings. This is just a picture of some quality control around silk screening. So the fabric is dyed, it may be silk screened, it may have buttons put on it, whatever. There are all these different steps that happen in the factory, and this is what is of concern to the pilot, these steps. The heart of the certification is on the work floor. So the picture right behind was just a few guys who were doing quality control, but this is where dozens of women were, well, in one factory they were almost all women, in one factory they were almost all men, and we learned that that was because of the cultural norms of the different states in India that we were in. So that raises another question. Fair trade is very big on gender equity. And yet, at the same time, we have to be culturally sensitive to what, so if you go into a factory and say, well, 100% of the factory workers are men, this must not be a fair trade factory. Obviously, I'm oversimplifying, but understanding those nuances in the same country made things very, very complicated. But these are some women who are doing some of the cutting and stitching. One of the things that we heard, although this wasn't an inspection, but things that you might not think about, is that these women are standing, and they are standing up for hours at a time. Are there rubber mats for them to stand on to do shock absorption? This woman is actually putting fabric into an iron. So another part you might not think about clothing, you know, I often look a little rumpled. My mother lets me know that every time she comes to visit. But most people like their clothing to be ironed. Ironing is part of it. And I think we'll probably hear from Pushpika and Maureen relative to that. Sorry, I went too fast. Because here's a machine that is taking care of the ironing, whereas we also got to visit several artisan groups. And these are folks working in their own homes or in small workshops in slums with actual handheld irons. And they're going through the same process, but it's not mechanized. And what are the implications of that for artisans? Then it's folded up. These are some bags, and they're sent off for shipment. This is Liz O'Connell from Green America. She's showing off one of the products. In the background is Rajat. He's an owner of the factory in Calcutta. But of course, the merchandising, the design, the making sure you're fitting the hottest trends and responding to consumer demands is also a part of the apparel industry. In coffee or chocolate, certainly there are taste preferences and there are quality concerns and specialization, but nothing seems to turn as quickly as fashion. We did, as I mentioned, have an opportunity to visit with some artisans. Marketplace was particularly gracious in welcoming us and showing us their facilities in one of their workshops in Mumbai. We also got to meet with some of the women. This is a family that brought us into their house, and we interviewed them about their experience with Marketplace. It often doesn't make sense to talk to artisans about their experience with fair trade, because fair trade is often more of a consumer recognized concept. They just know how Marketplace or Mata or Asha or Creative Handcrafts or any of the groups that we talk to, they just know how they're treated with that organization. And I think that's one of the critical issues around fair trade is that when I said fair trade could mean many things to many different people, to pioneers and fair trade organizations in the movement, what fair trade means is that sustainable development. It means finding the most marginalized and the most disadvantaged people and working with them and trying to give them skills that they might not have, or opportunities that are not available to them due to their gender or caste or any host of reasons. And so the role of artisans in these supply chains, or in competition, if you will, to factories, is a big concern. And I'm actually going to leave it at that. This is just a kind of a juxtaposition. So on the left is a woman sewing a sewing machine. Great sewing machines. I'm not taking anything away, but for those of us on the tour, doesn't that look a lot like the Singer machine that we saw in the Hull House? And then on the other side is a worker in a factory. Totally every machine was mechanized. There were, as you saw, the irons that were mechanized. And basically I put this up as just a juxtaposition because we have to find out a way to help that woman and that man, that factory worker. He deserves a living wage. He deserves the opportunity to have decent and safe working conditions. We don't want to put him in competition with the woman from the slums in Mumbai. Or in Calcutta, we met an artisan group called Free Set. They're trying to bring women out of prostitution and human trafficking. They guarantee a job for any woman who will leave the brothel. They give her 3 months of training on the sewing machines. If after 3 months she can't stitch worth a dime, they still give her a job. They find a way to have an alternative to the sex trade. That's the development agenda of a fair trade organization, as opposed to a factory organization, which might be a business that's trying to be socially responsible and needs to pass certification standards. But what is the point of their business? And that's where I end with a whole bunch of questions. Nancy, when she invited me, raise 2 or 3 issues we could discuss. Well, I listed, I think I have 7. I'm sorry. But what constitutes a living wage? And is that the best measurement? One of the things what we heard from both factory workers and artisans were, certainly, we want a decent standard of living, but you know what we really want? Orders. Why aren't you people ordering more? Well, fair trade, it's this big fancy thing, right? We keep hearing it's going to change our lives. Place the orders. Second of all, can certification, as I've alluded to, benefit artisans as well as factory workers? How can we take in the political and cultural and geographic contexts and create generic standards? We heard that Florence Kelly said consumers have responsibilities as well as rights, and we have the right to know, and we want our clothes to match our values. But are we imposing our own sense of what standards should be relative to these working conditions? Are we kind of imposing upon the producers our idea about what makes us sleep well at night, when really the diversity of their situation suggests that maybe it needs to be on a case-by-case basis? But then again, there's transparency. So how do we make sure that they're doing what they say that they're going to do? Other questions. What is fair trade for, really? Is it for us as consumers so that we know how we're spending our dollar? That was the point of the white label, right? Florence Kelly was trying to get people to get involved based on the white label to protect themselves from health concerns. Or is fair trade about building skills? Is it about bringing people into a globalized economy? Is fair trade about confronting poverty through increasing income? Or is it about empowerment? Is fair trade about rewarding good companies? We don't, there's no shortage of companies that have let us down, from the banking industry to the technological industry to the origins of it all with sweatshops. So should we use fair trade to reward good company? And then finally, who gets to answer these questions? Is it Chicago Fair Trade? Is it Jackie and some development organization hanging out in headquarters? Is it the unions? Is it the workers themselves, the producers? Or is it their representatives? I don't have any particular answers to any of those questions, but I'm looking forward to the Q&A and for us to figure out the way forward. So thanks for your attention.